Hey, I'm Parker, and welcome back to Tech Talk Tuesday. Today, we're going to be covering XXE as part of our cybersecurity mini-series. For those of you who have watched our previous video on injection and are familiar with the topic, I know that we've already covered injection, but the particular tips that we're going to be giving in this video will not overlap with those ones, so it is still relevant, and they are specifically more relevant to XXE. For those of you who have not seen it, I recommend going back and watching it because those tips are also relevant to XXE, today's topic. So what is XXE? Well, in short, it stands for XML External Entities, but then for some reason they left the term injection off the end. Effectively, it's an XML injection. You will have some external source submitting an XML document, and in the process of utilizing that document, there are unwanted consequences or undesirable effects. So how to prevent it? The first, don't use XML. The second, don't use external entity XML or DTD processing. Now, both of these are conceptually straightforward and a little bit of a cop-out, but that being said, they are worth mentioning and considering, because if you don't have XML and you're not processing XML, you can't have XXE. In a more realistic sense, what you can do is make sure that all of your XML libraries and related software is up to date. As long as you're not heavily dependent on some specific version, this can often be moderately trivial to implement and is, again, often a great first step. And lastly, what I think is probably the most interesting, which is avoiding the serialization and deserialization of data. Now, when I first read up on this, I didn't quite understand why this might be a problem, and I'm not going to pretend like I know every reason why. That being said, we will first examine some of the issues with deserializing and then serializing. So in the process of deserializing, let's use a hypothetical example. Let's say somebody else in your office or work environment is, because I guess we're not really in the office now, they're responsible for a server. And this server has to send your server XML data. It has to be serialized when it's sent. It has to be obviously from an external server. It has to be an XML. And also though, we trust this server. We're not worried about it sending nasty data. But what happens if in the process or in transit of that being sent, somebody manages to manipulate that data? In the most benign occurrence, maybe they change the overall structure of the XML. That'll just break stuff, maybe, depending on your code. But in a malicious sense, they could change maybe a file pointer. A classic example is changing something like maybe a list of countries and turning it into a list of passwords. So instead of like countries.txt, it's passwords.txt or something along those lines. Additionally, there are instances in which somebody could actually run code with that XML. Next, moving on to the serialization. So this one's a little bit more obscure, but let's assume for a moment that we have some object, and this object's name is person. They have a name, an address, a phone number, a street address, an email address, and a credit card. Now, let's pretend for whatever reason the rest of those are public variables within this object, but that credit card, that's private. So in conventional coding, right, you wouldn't really be able to directly access that private variable. But the problem is in some ways of serializing, it doesn't necessarily pay attention to what's private and what's public. So when you serialize that data, it could get exposed. So for instance, I could take that people object, serialize it, and the credit card would be included, thus exposing data that you otherwise did not want exposed. Now, both the deserialize, serialize topic as well as XXE are very deep topics, and as always, we will be linking both an article that I found was really great for getting your hands dirty and really starting to understand some of the issues that crop up with deserialization and serialization, as well as the OWASP XXE article. So if you're interested, those are both there, and feel free to go learn more. That being said, let's do a recap. 1. Avoid XXE, or XML if possible. Disable external entity XML and DTD processing. Keep your XML libraries and handlers and whatever else up to date. And avoid deserializing and serializing when possible. Again, all 4 of these tips are circumstantial, so I know they're not always applicable, but those are 4 ways in which you can help mitigate XXE vulnerabilities. As always, I'm Parker. This has been Tech Talk Tuesday. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.